From WNIN News, this is the Friday Wrap. I'm John Gibson. On today's show, we welcome John Webb of the Evansville Courier and Press to talk about an investment in the city a century ago that none of us will likely live to see. We'll listen back to Tim Jagalow's story on a postal workers' protest and a new contract. Jevin Redmond will be along for the sports chat, and the Arts Council's Caitlin Bentley will join us for the Weekend Notebook. The Friday Wrap is next on WNIN FM with support from Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations following the news from NPR. It's the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson. Good to have you along on this Friday. Well, the city of Evansville will inherit millions of dollars, and none of us will be alive to see it. That's the beginning of a new story by our guest, John Webb of the Evansville Courier and Press. John, as always, we appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John.
Good to have you here. Well, let's talk about this story a bit. It was news to me, even though these donations were made more than a century ago. Can you tell us about these two gifts that were made back in the early 20th century?
Sure, yeah. The first one and the one that I mostly focus on came in 1912 from a guy named Adolf Melzer, who was named before that name became horribly toxic. But he...
but also the Melzer name is still here with Melzer Crust Stone and all that.
Sure, right? yeah. It's a very famous name, and at the time he ran Melzer Soap Works, so his name's lived on, and his money's also lived on as well. Yeah. He donated $1,000 and put it in a trust at City National Bank in 1912, and he said, per an agreement that he made with the bank, it was supposed to compound at 4% interest over the course of 250 years, wow. At which case it would be theoretically worth around $20 million, at which point it would be handed over to the city.
I see. Now, do we know why he said 250 years?
A little bit, yeah. So I the way I came across this story, actually, I was looking for something else in the archives. I was looking around something current, and I had to go back in the archives to try to find something on, and I came across just a bulletin that we had updating this in the 60s that this money still existed. So I had to go backwards from there. Yeah. But I found a story from when he actually made the donation, which was in October of 2012 or 1912.
1912, yes.
Not 2012. But he said that he just wanted to provide a fund which many years from now will retire a great part of the debt or will provide money for extensive public improvements. And I think he just wanted to see it reach that $20 million. I think he maybe picked a figure, and they gave him an amount of time at that interest rate, and they went with that.
I see. That makes sense. Although, of course, he and no one from back then, and no one today, of course, will live long enough to see it. We don't.
Not unless there's a huge change in modern medicine.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we say there were these two gifts, and there was yet a second one that was another similar kind of a thing a few years later, right?
Yeah, that came in 1924. W.C. Bussing, which was he was a newspaper magnate with Evansville Press, and he got some businessmen together, and they put together about $245. They put it in a community trust fund, and it was supposed to mature even faster than his, and by 2147 instead of the 2162 for Melzer, theirs was supposed to be worth $24.5 million.
I see.
And so together, those were going to combine and hand the city within a course of about 2 decades, $44 million.
Yeah, over the course of 250 years. So as I understand it, that framed certificate of deposit from Adolf Melzer still hangs in the controller's office, right?
Yeah, I went to the city controller's office. I talked to Robert Gunter about it, who's the controller now, and it's framed right across from his desk. He sees it every morning. He said he didn't know anything about it until he got the job last year. But yeah, it's framed up, and it's in this curly script. I've got a picture of it with the article.
Right.
And it says, that lays out the deal and the exact to the cent amount that it's supposed to be worth, and lays out the stipulations of it, that if the bank can't carry this forward and keep it that amount of time, then the money would eventually just be, however much it's worth at the time, be handed over to the city, which actually occurred already.
Yeah. So, let's get into that a little bit. I mean, along the line, you had some bank mergers and such, and that changed the course of where the money was being kept?
Yes. As far as I can track and what others can track, it was confusing to find the money at first because I thought it would still be with a bank.
Right.
And it technically is still gathering interest with a different bank, but City National, if I have this correct, and if there are any banking historians that say I have this wrong, but it's quite confusing. It eventually became Integra Bank, which we all know failed in the early 2010s. And I'm not sure if that is when the city took control of it. I know as of 2000, it was still with a bank.
Okay.
So sometime between 2000 and likely 2011, the city took control of that money, likely after Integra failed.
I see. And so even though the city now essentially has the money, no one's used it yet, right?
No, not as far as we know. Gunter said he has no interest in using it, that he would like to see it mature. He thinks it would be a cool thing, for this thing to follow through and follow Melzer's wishes, and then the other fund following, busing in the other's wishes, instead of dipping into it now. Right. He showed me the ledger where it is. So what they do, even though they have control of the money, what they do is every 2 years, they bid it out to area banks to see if they can get the best interest rate they can.
Sure.
And currently, it's being handled by German American, and I think they just did that earlier this year. So in a couple of years, they'll bid it out again. It may stay with German American, may go somewhere else.
Right.
And it continues to compound. He showed me actually how much the Melzer fund's worth right now, and I think if they were to draw it out, they would get a cool $61,000 today.
I see. Now, of course, the original donors, as we say, they thought $44 million, the two of them combined, eventually.
Yeah.
But that's looking unlikely now. Is that right?
Yeah, just because you can't really control interest rates over the course of 2.5 centuries.
Right.
You can't control interest rates over the course of 2.5 months sometimes.
True.
Let alone 2.5 centuries. So as of now, at the interest rate it's drawing, which I think is about, he said about 3.7%. It's in the story. That if it keeps going at that rate, by the time 2162 rolls around, it'll be worth about $11 or $12 million, which is not bad. But you have to wonder, $11 or $12 million is not going to be worth the same now as whatever the world looks like in 2162.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, that is the distant future. We're speaking with John Webb of the Evansville Courier and Press. You can see this story and all his stories at courierpress.com. This is the Friday Wrap. I'm John Gibson, and we're talking about these donations that were made way back in the early 20th century to basically gather interest over the course of 250 years, and at the end of that 250 years, the city could take that money and use it for whatever is necessary, 250 years down the line. Now, the city controller, as you mentioned, Robert Guntner, he keeps seeking the best interest rate for it every 2 years. Now, as we also know, there's a lot of uncertainty right now about, let's say, state and federal funding for cities. Did Gunther or anyone, disclose any pressure to try to tap into these gifts sooner than 2147 or 2162?
No, not right now. Like I said, 61,000. It'd be worth about 61,500 right now, which is not nothing. If any of us gets handed $61,000, we're over the moon.
Yeah.
But as far as like trying to break into that to get to help some city crisis, he said that he has no interest in doing that, and there's no pressure on him to do that. The city's not that strapped yet. Although there have been some hits, with the chaos and federal funding right now, with the cuts and the contract cancellations coming on. Just last week or 2 weeks ago, the city had expected to get a $20 million grant from the EPA,
right?
And they found out that it was just not really canceled, but it was just kind of on hold, and maybe on hold permanently.
Right.
And they were going to use that to do some updates with Mets and to build some ADA accessible sidewalks, and now that money's apparently not coming.
Yeah, at least on hold at this point.
Sure.
And so you mentioned the amount. 61,500 is where that amount stands on the Melzer. I believe the other one is something like 14,500.
Yeah, 14,400. Yeah.
So we're still a long way from millions of dollars.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so in the meantime, what are the plans here for this money? Anything else that'll be done other than just rotating around banks every couple of years?
Not really. It's going to sit there. Like the controller said, he would like to see it gain maturity and keep going. There's a chance still if the economy takes a nice surge up and interest rates go higher for people. It's that you could gain. If it gains 4.28% interest, right now it's at 3.87.
Right.
If it ever gets back up to that, there could still be a scenario in which 2162, it does reach that 20 million mark, which I think the exact amount was 19,662,000 or something like that.
Some change, yeah.
Sure, yeah. So, there's, an off chance that it could reach that amount, but as of now, it's, the money's just sitting there.
Sure,
and,
sure.
It's odd that Melzer chose 250 years. Like I said, he maybe just wanted to hit that certain $20 million mark,
right.
Which now $20 million is a great amount of money, but in 1912, it was unheard of. So
we should also point out too this $1,000 donation. $1,000 in 1912 was a pretty big amount of money.
Yeah, it's about akin to about $30,000 now.
Yeah.
So a nice chunk of change for sure, and. But now, it's just kind of there. It's gathering interest, and it's something, according to our archives, that we hadn't reported on, and I don't know if anyone else has reported on in at least 25 years.
That's right.
So I'm not sure. I don't remember how much it was worth in 2000, the last time we repored on it, but it's gone up since then.
Yeah, there you go. Well, it must have been interesting. You mentioned just sort of finding this story by accident.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about your process there and how you came across all this stuff and what you do when you find something like that.
Process is a kind word. To say that I've got a process.
Like sausage making.
Sure.
That kind of thing.
Well, like I said, I forget which story it was for. We write so much now at the paper that I'm probably working on 3 or 4 things at once sometimes, unless it's a huge thing, in which case, we set aside time and focus and get something done. But I think I was working on about 3 or 4 things at once, and I was checking the archives just to go back and confirm something historical, just for context, and another story.
Right.
And I don't even think, it wasn't even in the Courier archives, it was the archives of a different paper. There was a AP line out of Evansville.
The Associated Press?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Associated Press line out of Evansville, a different paper. I think it was a Kansas paper that they'd reported, just this little blurb from 1962, that Melzer's money's still there. It was the 50th anniversary of it at the time.
Right.
And that he'd made this donation, and I had never heard of it. And I'm in the archives a lot, and I asked around the newsroom, and no one had heard of it. So I went looking, and just by that accident, found this story.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Sometimes it works that way.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, anything else to add, John, that we haven't touched on here?
I don't believe so. As far as I know, those are the only 2 semi-secret funds the city has.
Yes, indeed.
But it'll be interesting. None of us will see it. In 2162, just to see how much money it's worth, and if we make it that long without having to use it, or who knows what will be going on then. Yes. So it's a way to look into the past and look into the future at once.
Yes, indeed. That is John Webb of the Evansville Courier and Press. You can see this story and all of his stories at courierpress.com. John, as always, thank you for coming in.
Well, thanks for having me, John.
Great to have you. All right, well, coming up on the Friday Wrap, WNIN's Tim Jagallo will join us. We'll listen back to his story about the U.S. Postal Service workers, a protest they held last weekend, and also a new contract for the postal workers. That's coming up on the Friday Wrap. I'm John Gibson. Hope you can stay with us at WNIN FM.
Support for WNIN comes from listeners like you and from Tucker Publishing Group, whose anniversary issue of Evansville Living features memories from the magazine's first 25 years, a replay on the Otters' 30 years of Frontier League baseball, and ideas for summer travel and education in the current issue of Evansville Living.
On All Things Considered, the world is brought to your car radio, smart speaker, and mobile phone. Hi, I'm Kenton McDonald, your local All Things Considered host on 88.3 WNIN. As we spend our afternoons together, enjoy local news, statewide news from Indiana Public Broadcasting, and national and international news from NPR. Join me Monday through Friday, 3 to 7, and thanks for your support.
This week in This American Life, we present the Museum of Now, filled with artifacts of this particular moment our country is living through. Like, for instance, the transcript of a judge who's questioning an executive order that seems to be based on statements that are completely untrue, or a piece of a street near the White House that construction workers are tearing up because it had been painted with the words Black Lives Matter.
It's a huge piece. Okay, I'll take this.
That's this week.
It was written as a series of poems in medieval times and transformed in the 20th century by the composer Carl Orff into songs of fickle fortune and gambling, gluttony, and lust. I'm Roger Collier, music director of the Evansville Philharmonic. Join me and Bill Heminger for a closer look at the Philharmonic's performance of Carmina Burana, as well as the return of conductor laureate Alfred Savia on the latest episode of the Inside the Music podcast at WNIN.org.
On the next Radio Lab, the story of one building.
A secretive government compound where they keep secret files.
Miles of documents.
The files in that building, if they were ever released, could rewrite 200 years of history.
The village was like a concentration camp.
Documents that illustrate and prove it beyond doubt.
Like, why isn't this a tale that everybody in the world knows?
That's on the next Radio Lab.
It's the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson. Thank you for joining us on this Friday. Well, U.S. Postal Service workers protested across the country this past Sunday in response to discussions from the Trump administration to privatizing the service. WNIN's Tim Jagalow tells us Evansville carriers are also concerned about rural customers.
Why are we the last mile for our fellow citizens? Because we've got a commitment. It's a service. It's not a profit loss statement. It's a
Evansville had one of 9 protests in Indiana on Sunday. There were more than 200 across the country by the National Association of Letter Carriers. According to NPR, President Trump said he's thinking of moving the Postal Service under the umbrella of the Commerce Department, a possible first step toward privatization. The overall concern is for delivery prices to increase and for service to rural areas to become expensive and infrequent. The message across the protests was that the USPS is a service, not a for-profit venture. This is echoed by American Postal Workers Local 347 President Mitchell Dupree.
Because we understand that, when you're doing some type of cost analysis, sometimes serving the people isn't cost effective in the short term. Obviously, our forefathers had the foresight to realize in the long term it is cost effective for our people. Everybody needs the ability to freely communicate.
Yahtzee Roysden, Indiana State Association of Letter Carriers president, says rural areas will hurt the most if the delivery goes commercial.
And if they come in and they cut this out, then I think the prices are going to skyrocket. It's going to be profitable for them to do New York, but it's not going to be profitable for them to do the rural areas. And I think that's where the problem is.
The tri-state contains many rural areas. Speakers at the protest urged support of House Resolution 70 that calls on Congress to take all appropriate measures to ensure that the Postal Service remains an independent establishment of the federal government and not subject to privatization.
I urge every one of you to call your senators, to call your state representatives, your federal representatives, and tell them to support H.R. 70.
For WNIN News, I'm Tim Jagalow.
And Tim joins us live here in the studio. Tim, as always, good to have you with us.
Good to be here.
All right. Well, let's talk a little more about this. What more can you tell us about this House Resolution 70?
Well, I basically read the whole thing in the story. It's very short, and it starts with the words, express the sense of the House of Representatives that Congress should take all appropriate measures to ensure that it doesn't get privatized. And that's the whole thing.
Okay.
So it was sponsored by a Democrat from Massachusetts, Stephen Lynch, and it's currently, and it's been sitting there since January 28th in a House committee. And, it's got 180 co-sponsors, 10 Republicans, and we'll say statewide, local ones. We've got Representative Frank Mervyn, a Democrat from the 1st District of Indiana, Representative Carson Andre from the 7th, and we've got Kentucky Representative Morgan McGarvey of the 3rd District in Kentucky, and there's 14 from Illinois that sponsored it.
So obviously lots of support among Democrats, not so much from Republicans.
Well, yeah, only 10 that I could see and count on the list. And of course, the National Association of Letter Carriers supports it. I'm not sure if it has teeth or not.
Right.
If it even gets all the way there.
Sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about this talk of privatization. Basically, where did it start?
This was a first-term thought or goal of President Trump, and it was not supported by either side of the aisle at that time. It was renewed when he was reelected, when he was president-elect. This was a revitalized goal of his, and so this has been kind of looming for a little while now. He used the words like, "We're looking into that. People think privatization is a good idea," and so both Trump and Elon Musk have suggested that the USPS should be privatized. The USPS did lose $9.5 billion in the fiscal year of 2024, while also, increasing operating revenue from $1.4 billion to $79 billion, which is good, but historically has been losing money. It's been user supported primarily since 1970. So stamps are the only thing that's supporting it, basically.
Right.
And kind of like the water department here, I guess. The water bills are the only thing that's supposed to be supporting that system. So, Louis DeJoy is the outgoing Postmaster General. He's stepping down. President Trump can pick the next one, which could speed this occurrence if it is going to happen.
Yeah, the privatization. Speaking of privatized mail service, it's something we've never really had here in the U.S., unless you talk about package delivery, that kind of thing. We obviously have private businesses doing that. But are there other countries with privatized mail service?
There are several, and I don't have a complete list. And I will add, before I forget, that Canada actually, it comes up in Canada as well, the talk of privatizing. They've lost $3 billion over the past 6 years. Their mail service has. But I know that the UK and Germany have it, Italy, I think Portugal, there's Finland, I believe, according to Yahtzee Royston. Way he talks about it, basically he says, the prices have doubled, and I'm using air quotes, because I don't know where that is or what specific nation he's talking about. But the UK did move to privatization in 2014. And at the same time, they've also lost a bulk of mail being just shipped, so there's fewer pieces being delivered. Their prices do go up. There's going to be another increase hitting April 7th of 5%. And I don't know about the rural coverage. If rural UK has trouble getting it, they still deliver 6 days a week. Even a year ago, separate of all of this, there was discussion of the UK Royal Mail eliminating a few days a week of coverage just to save money.
Right.
And so they still deliver Monday through Saturday. But according to at least one piece by The Guardian, a column, it's been badly run, and they've also had contract issues with their letter carriers.
All right. Well, speaking of contract issues, I understand there was another issue here at the same time as these protests were going on. The letter carriers were waiting on a contract. Let's hear your story on that.
A neutral arbitrator was used to resolve the collective bargaining impasse between the USPS and the union, the National Association of Letter Carriers. Many letter carriers are reportedly disappointed with the long-awaited contract and even feel that talks of privatization rushed the process. Local letter carrier Austin Seibert.
Because of the threats of privatization, our national union president, Brian Renfro, who's in a lot of hot waters now, essentially chose expedited arbitration, which is a faster version and tried to lie and assure the membership that
the normally 2-week arbitration period was reduced to 2 days. Seibert says the new contract is essentially just the second offer from the USPS. The second offer was rejected by NALC negotiators, which triggered arbitration. NALC President Brian Renfro highlighted consistent pay increases of the new contract and cost of living increases, among other things. But Seibert says letter carriers he knows are upset because much of the tentative agreement they rejected was back on the table during arbitration.
Really didn't listen to the membership at all with that regard. We voted the whole thing down, did not get to voice our opinions on that, per se. So now we are stuck with a very inadequate new contract.
Seibert says this could cause both a demand for Renfro to resign and for letter carriers to quit in large numbers after receiving back pay. For WNIN News, I'm Tim Jagalow.
And Tim Jagalow is still with us here live. So it sounds like, at least according to this source, there are a lot of letter carriers who are not happy with that new contract.
Yes, and I can only, and to be clear, I talked to him because no good deed goes unpunished. He held a rally several months ago, and I've just been bothering him for answers since then, and he kindly sends me things. But the NALC itself, as an organization, does not talk to the media, not as a matter of keeping information away from people, but just because they say they don't want to basically have arguments about these topics through the media with their letter carriers.
Right.
And the USPS also releases kind of simple, bland, one-sentence statements. So the best place to hear about this is from the employees. And I also scanned some letter carrier community pages on Facebook, and it was kind of the responses to the contract was kind of ranging from, well, it could have been worse considering everything happening, or, I'm going to quit next week, or after I get my back pay, I'm going to quit. So those are kind of the responses that I saw on there. And, the Fight Like Hell campaign, which they're still using, it started about, considering the contracts. They were fighting for their contracts while arbitration was happening or the negotiations were happening. And now it's kind of had to switch to fighting privatization.
Yeah.
And again, like he said, negotiations or arbitration should have taken 2 weeks. It only took 2 days. He said that it was called, I forgot the word, but basically both sides kind of just agreed on the terms, and the arbitrator just kind of signed off on it instead of it being I'm the arbitrator writing the terms and having them be different from what was offered.
Yeah.
They essentially, in their words, got the rejected second offer from the USPS as their contract.
Yeah. So, obviously that happened very, very quickly once it got to that arbitration point. Anything else to add on this, Tim, that we haven't discussed here?
Well, I don't understand all the fine points of the contract. There's a lot of tiers involved. I know that the USPS, the letter carriers, and we're talking about city carriers here, wanted better pay for non-career carrier assistance, and they got a little bit of that. They had a couple of, at least one tier removed before you get to full-time career status. That happened, but it just basically the word from them is just it just wasn't, the contract wasn't enough. And of course they've got this privatization talk looming, which there hasn't been any movement on that the past few weeks, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
Yes, indeed. Stay tuned, as they say. That is WNIN's Tim Jagalow. Tim, as always, thank you for all your work.
Of course.
We certainly appreciate that. Well, coming up on the Friday wrap, it's a big sports weekend. It's been a big sports week in the area, and we'll chat sports with Jevin Redmond. That's coming up. Also, the Weekend Notebook is straight ahead. Hope you'll stay with us. This is the Friday wrap. I'm John Gibson. We'll be back shortly.
Support for WNIN comes from listeners like you and from Tucker Publishing Group, whose anniversary issue of Evansville Living features memories from the magazine's first 25 years, a replay on the Otters' 30 years of Frontier League baseball, and ideas for summer travel and education in the current issue of Evansville Living. The YMCA of Southwestern Indiana, offering a variety of programs like fitness classes, aquatics, pickleball, and more, designed to help members achieve their goals and stay connected. Details at ymcaswin.org.
Hey, it's Luke Burbank. This week on Livewire, poet and author Morgan Parker on her favorite clothing store to cry in.
I've cried in many a Gap, and they don't bother me when I'm crying. And after I'm done crying, they're like, would you like to try on these jeans? You know?
That's this week on Livewire from PRX.
It was written as a series of poems in medieval times and transformed in the 20th century by the composer Karl Orff into songs of fickle fortune and gambling, gluttony, and lust. I'm Roger Collier, music director of the Evansville Philharmonic. Join me and Bill Heminger for a closer look at the Philharmonic's performance of Carmina Burana, as well as the return of conductor laureate Alfred Savia on the latest episode of the Inside the Music podcast at WNIN.org.
Our statewide news team wants to hear from you. Stay in touch by joining the Indiana Two-Way. You'll receive a text to your phone every Thursday morning with questions related to statewide topics and news updates to keep you informed. Your responses will guide our future reporting and make sure we are covering the stories that matter to you. To join, go to ipbs.org/text.
It's the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson. Thank you for joining us today. And joining us right now is our own Jevin Redmond with this week's Sports Chat. Good to see you, Jevin.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Thanks for being here. Well, busy time for sports, obviously. Let's start with women's college basketball, sort of a sad story from last night.
Yeah, last night in the WNIT, which is the second-tier tournament of women's basketball. Of course, USI could play in that one. They'll be eligible for the Division I tournament next year, but still a good year for USI women's basketball. They went 23-13. They lost, though, in their Super 16 game of the WNIT last night to Buffalo, 76-64. Buffalo is 27-7, but still a historic season for the Scream Eagles as their women's team made it deeper than they did last year in the tournament. They had a first-round bye. They won a second-round game against Campbell, down the final 16 teams. So while last night was disappointing for them, still overall a great season.
Yeah, and still other college basketball going on here in Evansville. The NCAA Division II men's tournament continues at the Ford Center, right?
Yeah, so it's been a busy 3-week stretch at Ford Center with the OVC Conference Tournament, the Missouri Valley Women's Conference Tournament, now the Division II Elite Eight. But that wraps up tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock Central Time. Cal State Dominguez Hills takes on Nova Southeastern, and Nova Southeastern is an incredible story. They've been to the Elite Eight the last several years, and John, they average 102 points per game. They've only lost one game all year long. They're 35-1, so they go for a championship tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I want to make one note, though, about that Division II Elite Eight. There was some local storylines with that. Lenore Ryan, who was one of the teams in it, they lost on Tuesday, but their head coach is former USI player and assistant coach Brent Owen. He had a great year there as a head coach of Lenore Ryan, leading them to Elite Eight in Evansville, so I want to make note of that.
Yeah, very good. And of course, more big basketball going on all across the country. It's the Division I men's basketball tournament. And tonight's a big night. We got a couple of big matchups, right?
Yeah, so up in Indianapolis at Lucas Oil Stadium where the Colts football team plays, 2 games tonight. Kentucky takes on Tennessee, so you have an SEC battle there. That's at 6:30. And then at 9 o'clock, you have Purdue taking on Houston. So a lot of close fan bases there with, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Purdue. So I'm sure it'll be wild up at Lucas Oil Stadium this evening. Should be 2 great games as we'll be down to the final 8 teams after tonight. The Elite Eight is tomorrow and Sunday. Then it's the Final 4 next week. And so basketball season's coming to a close. One more note, though, up in Indianapolis this weekend. Tomorrow is the boys high school basketball state finals. And the tri-state area had 2 teams playing in the semi-state last weekend. Unfortunately, both Princeton and Forest Park lost. Princeton lost their first game last weekend to Indianapolis Attic, 61-55. That was in Class 3A. The Tigers, though, went 24-3 this year, and Forest Park lost on a buzzer beater last weekend against Park Heritage, 48-46. That was in Class 2A. The Rangers went 19-7. 2 great seasons for Princeton and Forest Park, but unfortunately, no local teams in the tri-state area playing the state finals tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to another big event this week. The Major League Baseball season has begun in earnest. As I understand, you sat through a rain delay yesterday in St. Louis.
I did. So I was over in St. Louis at Busch Stadium Stadium for the Cardinals and the Twins. It was scheduled for a 3:15 first pitch, and it rained all the way until about 3:30, 4 o'clock, and they removed the tarp closer to 4 o'clock, still went on with their ceremonies, and fans got to see the Clydesdale run around the outfield track, and that's always a great tradition in St. Louis. But the Cardinals beat the Twins 5-3, and opening day is always fun for fan bases because no matter what happened last year, there's always that sense of optimism, sense of hope. Everybody's 0-0, and Cardinals start 1-0. Also, the Cubs beat the D-backs last night. Reds lost to the Giants, and John, your White Sox, they're above 500. They won their first game against the Angels 8-1.
We'll see how long that lasts. But yes, that was a good opening day for a lot of teams yesterday. A couple not so great. But anyway, we should also mention in the NBA last night, the Indiana Pacers did something they've never done before.
Yeah, so, while high school and college basketball season is wrapping up, the NBA is getting closer to the playoffs. They have about 2 weeks left in the regular season. The Pacers, last night, they were in Washington taking on the Wizards. Now, the Wizards are having a very down year. They were 16-56, but regardless, the Pacers scored 162 points in their 162-109 win. It was a franchise record for the Pacers, most points scored in a game. Also, they made 27 three-point field goals, which was the most in one single game in franchise history, and the Pacers improved to 43-30. John, they're in fourth place in the Eastern Conference standings right now, in position to have home court advantage in the first round of the playoffs. The Pacers have 9 games left in the regular season, and they have a 2-game lead on Detroit for that home court advantage.
There you go. Go Pacers. You score 162 points, you're probably going to win.
I'd hope so, yes.
Yes, indeed. That is Jevin Redmond with this week's Sports Chat. As always, Jevin, thank you very much.
Yep, thanks, John. All
right, well, coming up on the Friday Wrap, it'll be the Weekend Notebook. The Arts Council's Caitlin Bentley will be joining us. Hope you can stay with us.
WNIN listeners are civic leaders serving on nonprofit boards and committees, and they're engaged in the community. Hi, I'm Laura Porter, WNIN's underwriting account executive. Learn how your message can reach that valuable audience. Visit WNIN.org, click on the Support tab, and then select Corporate Support. Or email me at lporter@wnin.org.
This week in This American Life, we present the Museum of Now, filled with artifacts of this particular moment our country is living through. Like, for instance, the transcript of a judge who's questioning an executive order that seems to be based on statements that are completely untrue, or a piece of a street near the White House that construction workers are tearing up because it had been painted with the words Black Lives Matter.
It's a huge piece. Okay, I'll take this.
That's this week.
It's dreams of love, immigration, and a more perfect union. The late Jesse Colin Young speaks of a 1960s song about getting together in peace. Haitian-American songstress Layla McCallum talks about her dreams discovering Creole New Orleans, plus songs from the Everly Brothers, John Prine, and Mavis Staples. It's Dreamers, Then and Now, on American Roots from PRX.
It was written as a series of poems in medieval times and transformed in the 20th century by the composer Carl Orff into songs of fickle fortune and gambling, gluttony, and lust. I'm Roger Collier, music director of the Evansville Philharmonic. Join me and Bill Heminger for a closer look at the Philharmonic's performance of Carmina Burana, as well as the return of conductor laureate Alfred Savia on the latest episode of the Inside the Music podcast at WNIN.org.
On All Things Considered, the world is brought to your car radio, smart speaker, and mobile phone. Hi, I'm Kenton McDonald, your local All Things Considered host on 88.3 WNIN. As we spend our afternoons together, enjoy local news, statewide news from Indiana Public Broadcasting, and national and international news from NPR. Join me Monday through Friday, 3 to 7, and thanks for your support.
It's the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson, and joining us now is Caitlin Bentley from the Arts Council of Southwestern Indiana. Caitlin, good to see you again.
It's good to see you. Thanks for having me back.
Good to have you here. Well, let's talk about things happening this weekend. Quite a few events going on. For starters, tonight we have Books and Beers at Haney's Corner Brewing Company. This is a casual book club that meets on the last Friday of each month. This month, they're reading A Death in Door County by Annalise Ryan. That discussion is tonight at 6:30 at the brewery on Adams Avenue next to the Alhambra Theater. Also happening tonight, it's Friday night in the Forum at USI. The free film series continues with a showing of The Motorcycle Riders. That's at 7 p.m. You're also welcome to stay for a discussion after the screening in Forum 1 of the Wright Administration Building at USI. And Caitlin, I know theater, some live theater happening tonight in a couple of spots, but first of all, the University of Evansville Theater, right?
Yes, so it's another big weekend for theater. Romeo and Juliet is going on at the UE Shanklin Theater. There is a 7:30 p.m. showing tonight and Saturday, and I believe there is a matinee on Sunday as well. There is a ticket cost, but if you're a student, you get in for free. So I recommend taking advantage of that.
Sure. Yeah, otherwise, I believe adult ticket prices are $20 and $18 for senior adults to check out Romeo and Juliet at the University of Evansville Theater. Also happening, as we mentioned, another big night for theater. Evansville Civic Theater is performing the comic play Moon Over Buffalo again this weekend, with shows at 7:30 tonight and tomorrow night, as well as 2 Sunday afternoon at the group's temporary venue, that's Bosse High School. Tickets for those performances are also $20. Again, that's the Evansville Civic Theater performing Moon Over Buffalo at Bosse High School here in Evansville. Now, we have some events happening on Saturday, and I believe, Caitlin, you've got the lowdown on all of those Saturday events, right?
Yes, so starting off, we have the 63rd Annual Undergraduate Student Exhibition at UE. That runs from 12 to 3 p.m., so go support the collegiate artists. It runs until April 12th, but tomorrow should be a good day to go do that.
Yeah, from 12 to 3. All right.
And then we have, at the Arts Council, we have an event with the Indiana Arts Commission called Work in Progress Exchange Lab. That is from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m., and this event is for artists interested in sparking organic networks and growing your career locally. The Indiana Arts Commission did a needs-based assessment for artists, and this program is kind of what was born for that. So it's designed to provide network and connection for emerging artists across the state.
Yeah, so I guess it's an exchange lab. Folks can exchange ideas and that sort of thing?
Yes, it can be good stuff and bad stuff, but it's a great opportunity to connect with people that work in arts at the state level. There is a registration. All you have to do is go to the Indiana Arts Commission website, but it is free. So I recommend looking at that.
Yeah, sure. And speaking of free, I believe it's a free weekend at Wesselman Woods, right?
Yes, so from 9 to 5 tomorrow and 12 to 5 on Sunday, Wesselman Woods has free admission. This is happening the last weekend of each month this year, which I think is great. You can enjoy the 4 miles of trails. There's the 5-acre nature playscape. There is the Arwood Family Treehouse and the Bird Sanctuary. So, I think this weekend is going to be great weather for that. So,
well, hopefully we will see out there some rain in the forecast, but hopefully you can get out there and enjoy the free weekend at Wesselman Woods, and also some music out in New Harmony this weekend. Correct?
Yes, there is another Under the Beams. This time it is Bariba Union. So there's a cellist, a bassist, and they all do vocals, and they blend original music with global influences, including Brazilian, bluegrass, jazz, classical, hip-hop, pop. I hear it's very high energy, and there's a lot of improvisation, so that should be pretty cool.
Yes, indeed. That's Under the Beams at Murphy Auditorium, I assume?
Yes.
All right. And tickets are available?
Online. At the New Harmony website. Under the Beams website.
The Under the Beams website, sure. All right, well, many things happening on Saturday. Moving on to Sunday, speaking of music, the USI Jazz Ensemble and the Tom Drury Quartet will be performing at Boca Lounge. The music starts at 2:30 p.m. Sunday at the venue on Parrott Street. Admission is free. And I believe you've got something new from the Arts Council. Apparently you've got some concerts set to go this year, right?
Yes, we have officially announced our 2025 On the Roof lineup. It has been a long time coming. We've worked tediously to get a great roster of artists for you. So the first date is May 31st, Saturday. Doors open at 6. It's a little bit longer this year, so it's 6:30 to 10 p.m., and we'll have 3 artists on each bill. So that first one is the Randys, Macro Geo, and DR Bridges. So
cool.
Free, all ages event.
Yes, another sign that spring is coming. The On the Roof concerts are coming back. That's great. That is the weekend notebook for this week. And again, we'd like to thank Caitlin Mitley from the Arts Council for joining us. Caitlin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, that's going to wrap up the Friday Wrap for this Friday. I'd like to thank all of our guests. John Webb of the Evansville Courier and Press, WNIN's Tim Jagalow. Thanks to Jevin Redmond, WNIN's Jevin Redmond, for not only the sports chat, but for engineering today's show. Thanks again to Caitlin Bentley of the Arts Council. Thanks to Mariah Winnie for social media support here at WNIN. Thanks also to Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations for their support. Thanks, as always, for your support. I'm John Gibson. Thank you for joining us on the Friday Wrap. And for this Friday, that's a wrap.